Hello, I'm Kimberley Dondo, Digital Content Manager, and welcome to the In Conversation With series, a series where I speak to notable figures in the realm of financial services. Listen as they share their personal journeys, thoughts on the industry, and advice for aspiring advisors. And today I'm joined by Ruth Handcock, Chief Executive Officer at Octopus Investments. So Ruth, can you give more of a detailed introduction to yourself?
Of course. Thank you for having me. So I'm Ruth. I run Octopus Investments as my day job, which for those of you that don't know is an asset manager with 12 billion under management. And we primarily work with financial advisors to provide tax advantaged investments to retail investors, as well as raising institutional funds. And we feel really passionately about investing those funds into the industries we think will change the world. So some of our end sectors are healthcare, venture capital, sustainable infrastructure, education. What I've also done since I joined Octopus is start to build out what I think of as an ecosystem of other companies that help individuals make better financial decisions and reduce the stress that lots of us feel in managing our money. So some of those are Seckle, which is an investment tech company that helps investment platforms get up and running quickly or helps financial advisors run their own platform. Octopus Money Coach that provides financial coaching to employees in the workplace, and most recently a brilliant firm called Guardian Angel that joined us just before Christmas that helps people plan for and manage the moment of bereavement.
Oh, wow.
That's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what I do day to day.
Yeah. So, that sounds all very interesting and some really great initiatives that you've put in place. But let's go to the beginning of your story and your journey. How did you start out in financial services?
Oh, I've got quite an eclectic background, actually, considering the role I do now. So I'm a scientist by education. So my first job was actually editing a science journal. I sat more in your seat than in mine. And then I spent about 10 years in management consultancy, actually firstly working primarily for public sector organisations, and then moved into helping financial services and professional services. So people like retail banks figure out how to deliver brilliant customer propositions. I then spent a year working in West Africa. So I knew I was drawn to mission-driven organisations. And I joined a charity that Tony Blair set up when he left office that places people in the governments in sub-Saharan Africa. So I was based in Sierra Leone, helping them attract foreign investment into the country. So financial services, but in a very different context. And I certainly learned a lot doing it. Then when I came back to London, I spent 3 years as a finance director for a big FMCG before leaving there to set up a new challenger bank. So this was the time when challenger banks were sort of a new thing. Actually, when we started, no one had the phrase challenger bank. And we got the first new retail license after Metro at that time when the government and the regulators were very keen on promoting competition in banking. So spent 4 years setting up a bank called Tandem that's still going today as a green lending bank. And then I joined Octopus. So relatively untraditional in the world of investments.
Yeah. But also, I mean, I've had quite a few conversations with people like from different sectors within financial services. And I find that no one has the same story. But yours is definitely the most interesting. I think also I can relate, having also started out as a science graduate and then moving into publishing. I did move into publishing thinking I'd work at a scientific journal, but I just ended up, where I am now. And I really enjoy it. I think it's all about the journey because you do pick up quite a lot of skills through that journey.
You do. And I certainly find I've gravitated towards working in founder-led organizations. That's definitely sort of my happy place. And one of the reasons for that is I think founders often value kind of competence and skills over knowledge. It's not to say knowledge isn't important, but they can often see past a traditional sort of fairly linear CV to think, well, actually, what are all the things that this person has picked up because they've had a slightly more unusual career. But I love the fact that we have science in common. That's good to know.
Yeah. So today I also wanted to kind of touch on Rishi Sunak's compulsory maths initiative. And, a lot of people have been giving it a few critiques, saying that it's not enough. It's, saying that you have to, study maths until, you leave sixth form or college, and then it's not exactly going to set you up knowing like more geometry or whatever, right? But what is necessary is financial education. So what is your take on that? What needs to be done for the population to have more financial education?
Yeah, it's a great question because, I'm a bit of a pragmatist, and I think that a step in the right direction is a step in the right direction. So is it a good idea to focus on maths as a skill? Absolutely. We've seen the impact that it's had when schools have focused really strongly on literacy. I think it really has had an impact on people's outcomes. So is the focus on it right? Yes. The tweaks I think we need to see over the coming years is we know that our school system is probably at the academic end compared with some countries around the world. And yet financial education is a very vocational topic. I don't think any of us think, as you say, spending more time on geometry and statistics is necessarily going to set someone up for making the right financial decisions. What you need is applied maths. So actually, it's all about the way this is implemented. And I don't think we've really got into the detail of how that's going to happen. But if we're thinking about vocational applications of maths, that might be anything from compounding, which if you speak to any financial planner will say if everyone understood compounding, they would probably be in a position to make much better financial decisions. So if you can embed that in people's psyche, that's a great start. The other thing I'd say to the positive is, I don't think there's ever been so much financial information available. You can go to the internet and you can find endless sources of information. So the problem here is not that people don't know where to go for the answers. The problem here is engagement. It's actually how do you deliver that information in a way that's personalized and relevant? Schools do that really well. So that's a phenomenal opportunity. Now, again, the proof is in the pudding, and if it's vocational, if it's engaging, I think it's a brilliant place to deliver financial education. But I think those two things have to be true to really have the impact it needs to.
Yeah. I think that makes complete sense. And for those people that, are no longer in school, like myself, what are the risks for people not having, those applied financial skills?
Oh, I think I'd probably zero in on a couple. So the first is mental health. So there is a strong correlation between money difficulties and poor mental health. And I think that we as a society have really woken up to what some people might describe as the mental health epidemic. Like it is, I think COVID lockdown have exacerbated a trend that was actually already there. But what people haven't necessarily done is make the strong link between if people are stressed about money, that can really exacerbate or create issues. So actually, some of the statistics we've found through our Octopus Money Coach business, when we rolled it out across Octopus as an organisation, we found that about 80% of our staff at some point in their career haven't been able to concentrate on work because they're so worried about money. 80% of people, that's phenomenal. So that is it's a stress and mental health problem, but it's also a productivity problem. If you're sitting in the seat as an employer thinking that if your team are really worrying about money, then they're not really able to concentrate on their job. So I think that's number one. Number two, actually, if you zoom out and think about, productivity and growth, which we should all be slightly obsessed with at the moment, I think if people don't feel comfortable with finances, they are way less likely to seek a career path in financial services. We all know that financial services of all industries is probably less diverse than some others. I think it's fairly unusual that the two of us are scientists by background.
Yes.
As women coming out of school, that's not we're definitely in the minority. Again, if I take Money Coach an example, if I look across our coaches, we've got lots of people becoming coaches as a second career. And the skills they bring are not necessarily pure financial. They're all about engagement. They're all about being able to connect with people and understand their goals and their aspirations. It's what financial planners are brilliant at.
Yes.
But the barrier that some people who have those skills have is they say, oh, finance is not for me. I don't like numbers. And it means that there's this huge wealth of talent who are blocking themselves out from those careers because they find money so scary. And I think if you can reduce that fear, if you can increase the comfort of people with financial services, actually the talent that's made available to the industry is huge. So I think that's the other opportunity.
And I find the initiative that you have there with the coaches very interesting, because I think last year I was having quite a few conversations with financial planners who were saying that they were interested in looking at more of the coaching aspect, because it deals more with like emotional responses when it comes to money. What is that kind of training like?
Yeah, so our coaches go through a really intensive 6-week training course. And I should say, for anyone who's listening who's wondering, well, what's the difference between a coach and a planner or an advisor? Really, it's as simple as a coach won't advise you on a product. They will help you come up with a long-term money plan, but they won't say, we think you should go for this platform and this fund. That makes it advice, bluntly. But actually, what most planners feel really proud of is that emotional connection and getting to that plan that makes sense for someone. And that's what a coach does. But because we provide it through the workplace, we provide it, on Zoom rather than face to face, we're able to do it at a significantly lower cost than most financial planners, which means that we can provide that service to everyone. So anyone in the workplace can book a financial coaching session. So I also have lots of conversation with financial planners who say, I would love to close the advice gap. I'd love to be able to find talented advisors. I'd love to be able to offer my services to people with lower investable assets, but I can't quite figure out how to do it. That's what Money Coach is here to try and solve, either in partnership with employers or in partnership with financial planning firms who see a need amongst maybe the families of their advised clients, but their current model just doesn't quite work for that segment. I think Money Coach can help there as well.
Yeah, I like that. I also like that you mentioned kind of closing that advice gap. And I like that you're kind of moving in that direction where you're putting in initiatives that can help with that. Do you think that there are other initiatives that you are looking to set up in the future that can help further close that advice gap?
Yeah, I think there are. So, we talked briefly just now about talent. So when I look across the Octopus Money Coaches, probably 30 or 40% would love to become a financial planner at some point. So, part of closing the advice gap is making sure that we have as many planners joining the industry as are leaving the industry. So I think there's a huge talent opportunity, and it creates a slightly different path in than the ones open to people at the moment, which are generally training and building your own book, or maybe coming in as a power planner. This is another way. Actually, you come in as the person engaging, having the conversation with the customer, and you move on from there. So I think that's a huge opportunity. The other one that I touched on in my introduction, where I think there's a big opportunity, is thinking, what are the sort of life moment, the tricky moment that you go through where finances are particularly complicated. So the one that we're looking at the moment is bereavement. For anyone who's been through the sort of traumatic experience of losing someone close to them, they'll realise that the administration and the financial decisions you have to make at that point are very complicated. And many people feel very ill prepared for making them. So the founding principle of Guardian Angel, which was founded by a great founder called Sam, was when Sam asked people, at the point at which you're bereaved, at the point at which you've lost someone, what is the one thing that could make this easier? And what they said was, if I could just have half an hour with the person that had died and say, where is everything? Where are your assets? Where are your passwords? So Guardian Angel is set up to try and recreate that, to try and make sure that before we die, we spend that half an hour telling our loved ones, writing down where everything is, so that when you're bereaved, you can deal with the emotional challenges that comes without being overwhelmed by the financial and administrative challenges. So it's a different spin on the advice gap, but really zeroing in on the moments where we're most in need of support.
Yeah, I really like that. I remember my colleague, my editor, Katie, wrote a weekend essay about her personal situation where after her father had passed away and having to kind of deal with all that admin and not knowing exactly where everything was. And I understand, like, thinking about it, and my parents, like, I don't think they're there yet, but sometimes I think I should ask them, but it feels almost callous to ask them these questions and be like, okay, so where are these, the life insurance, all this stuff, like, where are those documents? But my mom has always made a point of telling me this is the drawer with all my important documents. And when I was younger, I'd be like, don't talk to me about that. I don't even want to think about it. But now as I get older, I understand the importance of it. It's almost like, I don't know if this is terrible to say, but like when you're leaving a job or something, you have handover notes. So I kind of see it as that.
Yeah, so the tool that sits at the core of the Guardian Angel business is something called BOW, that gives you a death readiness score, which sounds slightly callous. I mean, think of it like a credit score for your own death.
Yeah.
And it says, right, if you've got a will in place, if you've got a last power of attorney, if you've written down where these things are, then kind of you're ready to die. And it's not something that any of us want to confront, but we can all be absolutely certain it's going to happen to us.
Yeah. I think as pragmatists, like scientific backgrounds, we can understand that more.
It's exactly it. It's exactly it. And I think having a third party involved, really what you want to do is help people have that conversation without having the emotions that you just talked about of feeling callous or awkward. Because actually, you could argue that if you can get over that, actually, when the moment comes, it will be much easier to deal with. But it's a problem all of us face. None of us want to have that conversation. But it means that at the point at which it inevitably happens, the challenges you have to deal with are so much tougher as a result.
Yeah, definitely. So during this time also, it's still quite tumultuous, I guess. We're in the rate of inflation and also the cost of living crisis. What would you say that advisors can do for clients that are maybe becoming more and more concerned, whether it's because they're tuning into the news every day and seeing some new headline that's maybe making them panic a little bit? What would your advice be to those advisors?
Yeah, and I think it's a little like the conversations that I had with advisors during COVID, which is when things are volatile. The easiest answer to me is over communication. So certainly what we did as a manager at Octopus at the beginning of COVID was say, we know that financial planners and their clients will be worried about investment performance. So let's over communicate what we think is going to happen. And make sure that that's always up to date, that it's freely available, that people don't feel they have to come and ask because the information's there. And actually, when I talked to financial planners, they were often taking the same approach with their customers. Now, what many of them said actually is, I'm getting fewer calls than I expected, because what I've been talking to my clients about year after year after year is financial planning is for the long term. There will be ups, there will be downs, but actually the most important thing is to think about that compounding effect over time and be clear that actually for most of your investments, it's going to make most sense to hold them for a long time. So actually, I think the planning community is very good at having sort of pre-educated their clients for moments like this. And I think in most cases that the time invested in that is paying back, because clients are, it's not to say they're not worried, but they understand the context and they have made their investment decisions in the knowledge that there will be points at which the economy is more volatile. I guess the other thing that is incredibly important at moments like this, though, is thinking about what is that balance of diversification across your assets. And I've definitely heard people say, oh, well, I need to think a bit more about cash. I need to think a bit more about liquidity, particularly if people are in retirement. But that's sort of planner's bread and butter. So to me, it's pre-education and it's over-communication, I would say, are the principles, actually, for any company when the economy is more volatile.
Yeah. And I assume with the consumer duty kind of coming into effect later on this year, that over-communication is going to be necessary anyway.
It absolutely is. Yeah. And I think, we all talk a lot about consumer duty at the moment, but and I think it is a great sort of progression of what we all knew the FCA cared about all along, which is brilliant customer outcomes. So again, when I talk to financial planners about consumer duty, most of them say, well, of course, this is what we're obsessed with. Now, we may need to document it in different ways, but I don't think it fundamentally needs to change the culture of my firm, because I get out of bed wanting to deliver brilliant customer outcomes, which is also what the FCA cares about. I just need to make sure that I've written it down potentially slightly differently, and also proved value, which is, I think, probably the biggest conundrum that most of us are facing on consumer duty is, how do you define value for money? Few of us have really got an answer. I think that's something that will evolve over time. Certainly not price alone. But how you define that is tricky. But I think it just sharpens that focus that most financial planning firms had all along.
Definitely. And finally, I guess I want to ask, for someone, with such a very interesting path through financial services, what would be your advice for someone who might be at the beginning of their journey, in the hopes to, maybe possibly get to where you are now?
Oh, it's a good question. So some of the best bits of advice I was given, actually, particularly in the early stages of my career, is I remember when I started work, I thought that the sort of trick of the game was pretending that you knew everything. So I want to show up feeling really confident and feeling like I'm on top of this. And someone said to me a few years in, they were like, it makes you look more experienced if you say, I don't know. So being vulnerable, asking for help, understanding that you're never going to know everything, trading off your competencies and your ability to learn rather than sort of pretending you know it all already, I think is the best bit of advice that I was given early in my career. And I'd say that because my career has been relatively unusual, and each job I've had, you sort of live off your wits when you've never done that job before. The skills I've come to rely on are broadly asking for lots of help and learning very quickly. And if you get good at those things, you can kind of turn your hand to anything. So really be vulnerable, ask for help, be okay with that. Understand that it doesn't mean people will look at you and think, well, they're incompetent if they're asking this question. They'll think, oh, they're curious, they're learning. I really back them. But that mindset took a bit of time to shift. Maybe our education system sort of embeds that in people. I don't know, because I hear it from a lot of people. But that would be my bit of advice.
I can completely relate to that. I think I've come to realize that now. Like, I call it, I don't mind looking like the dumbest person in the room, because I tend to get the most information from people from that. And I find that it almost disarms someone if you go in with an inquisitive mind rather than someone who's like, I know everything. I think you start at a very nice point where you can build from there.
And it also builds relationships. So humans fundamentally like to help humans. So if you go to someone and say, will you help me? It creates a bond that is really important in work and outside work. So I think it has multiple advantages. But it's definitely something that it took me about the first probably 5 years of my career to really learn.
Same. But yeah, it's very useful. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today, Ruth.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to In Conversation With. We do hope that you enjoyed it. Please do keep up to date with all our new releases via Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else you get your podcasts from. You can also keep up to date with all our new content published on the Money Marketing website, as well as our print edition Money Marketing magazine, so make sure to subscribe. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. See you next time.